Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. During this video I'll be showcasing to you how you can make your own explosions in Unity, and just to get started I'll show you the final result straight away so you can see if this is what you're looking for. So I've got a couple of cubes into the scene, and these cubes have rigid bodies attached to them in order to be affected by the explosions. Otherwise uh, objects without rigid bodies cannot be affected by explosions. So that is that. And then I have this effect right here. You can see that depending on where my mouse is and where I click, you can see this explosion going on and kind of pushing objects to the opposite direction. So if I were to be setting an explosion on the right hand side of this object, it's going to be exploding and moving to the left side. So let's have a look at the script and what you're going to need in order to mirror what I have on my scene. So I've attached this script onto the camera because I don't really have any other objects onto the scene. Obviously, you can attach it to maybe your player, maybe your gun or whatever. So it's called explosive script. You can name it again whatever you want. And this is the script. It's basically 50 lines of code, and I'll be running through all of these right now. So we've got a couple of variables here. The first three are part of what we are going to be supplying for the explosion function, which is part of the rigid body. So the one is the force, the radius, and the upwards modifier, which is essentially controlling how is distributed, how the force is distributed along the y-axis. So I'll be showcasing how that looks like in just a bit. Then I have the camera, which is set to static, and I'm getting the camera of this scene. I'm using it to set the explosions based on where my mouse is. You don't need to do this. Obviously you can do your own thing. This is how I thought I will demonstrate this example. Then I have a particle system which I didn't actually have activated, so I will activate it in a bit and show you. I wasn't planning on adding the particle system, but I thought some of you might be interested in that as well. I'll be showing you how to do that too. Then I'm getting the camera in the start function and the particle system from the resources folder that I have in the Unity side. So you can see in the assets I have a resources folder which has a particle system right here. So I'm using that and getting that and adding it into the variable that I have. You can see that it's a game object. Okay, so in the update function, I'm looking for any input from my mouse, and if I do press my left click of the mouse, I am raycasting uh, to the direction of where my mouse has clicked. So if I were to click right here, I'm going to be raycasting towards this direction from the camera. So depending on where I'm clicking and where the camera is, I'm going to be basically shooting a line and trying to hit anything. And if I do hit anything, I'm going to be causing an explosion. So this is what I'm doing essentially. We are raycasting through this small function that I have here, which is using screen to point ray, setting an explosion onto the that area. So if it hits anything, we're calling the explosion at position and passing in the ray hit point. So basically the position of where the raycast has hit something. So we call the explosion at position, and we're passing in the position of where the explosion will happen, and we need to get a hold of the objects that we're going to affect. So to do that, we need an array of colliders, and we are basically here creating an empty array of colliders, and I've set the number of size to be at 10. So this expect to be uh, will be hitting up to 10 objects within your scene, but this depends on what you're trying to do. If you have multiple objects within your scene and expecting to be hitting more than 10, you can adjust this number to fit the number that you want, because if it's above 10, you're going to have an issue with objects not being affected or having errors, etc. So be careful when setting the size of the array. And this array is going to be responsible for storing the colliders that we hit um, when using this function over here, which I'm going to be discussing right now. So as of now, when we write this line, if this is an empty array of colliders and has 10 elements in it, then we're using the uh, function from the physics class, which is called the overlap sphere non-allocation. And this essentially creates a sphere that obviously is not visible, but you can think of it as creating a sphere with the center being at the position of where the explosion is going to happen. And this will return the colliders that are going to be hit within the sphere. So any collider that is within this range or sphere are going to be stored within the heat colliders, and we're going to be using these heat colliders later on to be adding force to them one by one. So in the function, we're passing the position of where the sphere should be placed, so where the center should be placed, the radius of the sphere, and the heat collider, which is empty and is going to be returned as populated. And then this also returns how many colliders are hit, and we're going to be using this number to actually loop through all the colliders and adding force one by one to them. So in this loop here, the for loop, we're looping from 0 up to the number of colliders that we have hit. And so for each time, we're checking if there is a rigid body attached to this object, because there are objects that don't have the rigid body attached to them. For example, you see the floor here doesn't have a rigid body, but it does have a collider. So this will actually be captured by the um, overlap sphere, but we're going to be dismissing it due to not having a rigid body. So this is what the try get component does. If it does have a rigid body, we're going to be using it to this. So you can see that we are using the out rigid body and giving it the name of RB, and this will basically return to this local variable the rigid body of the collider that we hit. So if the object that we've hit does have a collider, we're going to be getting does have a rigid body, excuse me, does have a rigid body, we're going to be getting the rigid body and using it, add explosion to it with the force that we want, that we've set above, the position, the radius, etc. So you can see what we're doing here. And then okay, so the first is the force, the second one is the position, and the third one is the radius, and the fourth one is the upward modifier, which I'll be showcasing how this affects. So just to remind you how this looks like, let's run the game. You can see that you're able to bounce left and right the objects, but if I were to modify, let's say, the upward modifier to something larger, you'll see the objects jumping much higher than before. So let me just start this game again, and if I were to push, you can see kind of the objects being moving more on the y-axis than on any other axis. You can see kind of being static on the other axis, but being more uh, volatile and kind of jumping up more on the y-axis. So this is basically what the upwards modifier doing. And you can change the radius, maybe the force. So for example, now I'm expecting these objects to kind of yeet themselves out of sight. Let me just split this so you can see how far these objects are going to go. So, and you can see that they're gone. Okay, so this is how you can play around with these values. And lastly, you can also instantiate a particle system right here. And I didn't really put too much thought onto it, so the particle system you're going to see is not great, but again, it will add some extra visual onto your game. So I have already created the particle system, stored it in the resources folder, and each time I'm going to be clicking, it's going to be spawning a new particle system. It's not the most efficient way, but it's a simple one, and I want to add extra complexity. So this is how it looks like, and kind of gets the position of the where I'm clicking and spawning at that position. So that is all for this video. I hope you found this video useful and I helped you out with what you were trying to do. If you did enjoy this video, make sure to like and subscribe onto the channel. Thank you for watching. Have a good rest of your day and goodbye.